What do you think Ben Shapiro's favorite video game is?
Oh, Leisure Suit Larry.
Bully 2.
Minesweeper.
He's on the mezzanine right
I
below
stuck
you.
him! I stuck him! No!
Console Crusade podcast. I am Chris Gillyfor, for the first time, your host. Here as always with EJ Olson.
Chris! MVP! MVP!
Oh, stop, but also don't. And Nick Durheim.
I didn't hear anything that EJ just said because Discord muted him rightly.
Yeah, it peaked, you peeked the fuck out of it. It's just a silent screaming. And I'm like, is he muted? And then just pit. I'm like, oh, I
Just
get it.
fist shaking, and I imagine he's yelling.
You'll have to listen back to the pod, Chris.
I have been regularly. Thank you so very much. Also, Tiffany was disappointed last week in the Mario podcast that EJ, you are known for your insertion of clips after the fact when you want to make a point on your behalf and at the expense of someone else.
I had no points to make.
We discussed on pod your clip that was going viral on Reddit in which you sound like Seth Rogen, and you did not go and insert the clip of you sounding like fucking Seth Rogen. Tiffany was like, I feel cheated. As a regular listener, she felt cheated.
That's funny. That's good. My mom didn't know who Seth Rogen was, and when I was talking to her this week.
Why would she?
You know, that's a good question. But Daniel was like, I saw a Mario movie. Seth Rogen was hilarious. And I was like, yeah, haha. You know, the laugh was funny. And she's like, who's Seth Rogen? And so I just pulled up like a super cut of Seth Rogen's laugh. I was like, I don't sound like this guy.
No, I mean, by degrees, but no, largely no. And the big hair and beard definitely helps the comparison. So we are here today to talk about a particular game that we've been we've been saying that this sort of game diary retrospective has been coming, but it is finally time for us to talk about Metroid Prime Remastered HD on the Nintendo Switch, a game that some of us on this podcast have been looking forward to for a really long time because some of us have 3 matching Metroid tattoos on their body. Someone is me. Friends, we come to this game from pretty different points of reference, I think. Some of us have played it to a certain degree, some haven't played it at all, some are Metroid fans in 2D and in 3D, kind of sort of, some are not. So I just like to kind of like lay the groundwork here for everything that's to come. Nick, you played a little bit of Prime 1, but you're a Prime 2 guy, right?
Well, I started with Prime 2. That was the game I had on GameCube. I didn't finish it on the GameCube, but when Dread was announced, I just got bit by the hankering to actually finally go back and play through all the Metroid games that I hadn't played. So that was the time 2 years ago, I guess, now that I went through and I played the 3DS remake of Samus Returns. I played Prime 1, 2, and 3. I played Fusion. I played Zero Mission. And I played Super, I think, at that point as well. So it was like pretty much every single Metroid of note I played within a 3 or 4 month span. And I had played the beginning, maybe half of Metroid many times throughout the years, but this was the time that I'd actually stuck through and I played it all the way. And I played Metroid Prime 1 via the Wii release of the Metroid Prime trilogy that I'd bought on Wii U several years ago, because when it first came out, I was like, oh, that's really novel. They actually put out a digital version of this Wii game that's really hard to come by because they printed it in such limited quantities.
Yeah.
So I bought it a while ago with the best intentions of playing it. And I finally did, playing through Prime 1. But then I played Prime 2 and 3 via Prime Hack, which is a fork of Dolphin, the GameCube and Wii emulator that has built-in, you can do mouse and keyboard, you can play it like a regular ass PC shooter, or the way I played it was dual stick for all the way through Prime 2 and Prime 3. Which was a great experience and a great way to experience those games, as you both now well know. EJ, I'm not sure if you ever tried playing Prime 1 or 2 the OG way, like on the GameCube controller with the original sort of pseudo tank. I mean, it's not really tank because you're not looking at it from a third person perspective, but it is, you know, left and right to turn, forward and backward, like up and down, forward and backward. So it's that weird sort of very old school style of shooter controls. But 2 and 3 played great with the dual stick controls, and I think playing through Prime 1, I'm like, yeah, this is the right way to play these games. So that wasn't like really a transformative experience for me in this new one, but just revisiting this game with the updated textures and everything, it's like, wow, this game looks fantastic. It looked fantastic then, looks fantastic now.
I definitely have a physical copy with the steelbook in the slipcase of the Prime trilogy on Wii.
Of course you do.
Well, and I'll say, like, I didn't want to pay scalper prices, and I just happened to hit one on Craigslist that I think I paid $60 for. And I'm like there, and I'm buying this game from like a teenager whose mom or grandmother was there, just to make sure it wasn't like a sketchy ass Craigslist, kind of thing. And I'm like giving them the 320s, and I'm thinking, surely by this point they're gonna go like, no, like the price is 80 now, like they did a Google search at all, but nope, got it for $60.
Bro, I got Metroid Prime Trilogy. I can't remember if I paid $40 or $60. It was at a GameStop in Eugene.
Damn.
I did not go in there planning on buying it. And this was during my like peak collector phase where it was just buying everything that like I knew I had to play one day, just collecting all the best games because I felt obligated to. And so I had that sitting on a shelf for years. Never played it. I played the original on the GameCube years and years and years ago. Like close enough to Metroid having released that like I wasn't completely poisoned by modern games. And I feel like I still feel similarly now as I did then. And back then, I just thought maybe I didn't get it. Now I really get it.
When you say you played it, what do you mean exactly? Because my understanding is you played like an hour of this game on GameCube.
At this point, I couldn't tell you how far I got. I just wandered around aimlessly fucking finding missile expansions.
But it was a dabble just for purposes of
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And I think the original time I tried playing Prime 1, I think it was like a rental, and I remember getting past Flogra and getting to Vendrana, but I don't think I got to Thardis. So I think that was like a good little chunk of the game, but not really all that much.
Yeah, it's a good cross section for sure. I feel like that's probably a drop off point for a lot of people getting out of Magmore Caverns and being like, oh shit, like there's gonna be like a lot more areas and a lot more of this game. And then people either like bet and they keep going, or they're sort of like, I'm good.
Or it's a rental and you have to return the disc and you never get another one.
What a fine segue that is, Mr. Durheim. This was my first Metroid game. This is the one that got me going into this franchise, which is like crazy to think back to now because I have a lot of love for this, but the 2D Troids have almost like stuck around more in my memory. Maybe that's not true. Maybe I'm putting hindsight bias on this, but it was Prime 1 and it was a rental. And I didn't want to rent it. I did not want to rent that fucking game. I was like, I don't know what the fuck this is. Like, I'm sure I wanted to rent like Double Dash or something. But it was my GameCube. It was the first console that I like bought for myself with my birthday and Christmas monies. And Josh wanted to rent this game. He thought it looked cool. And so we started playing this game. And as soon as we got to, it's like 2001. So I'm 10. Josh is like 8, maybe 9. And as soon as the space pirates were introduced, Josh was like, this is too scary, I'm out. Like he noped out of that game so hard when the space pirate showed up. He was like, this is too scary. I don't want to play this. But I like getting down onto the surface of Talon 4 for the first time and just like seeing this like rich world and the scan visor. And it's like, I wanted to scan everything. I was literally like, I'm on a scientific expedition. I want to scan everything. I want to learn everything there is to learn about this planet. And I was just fucking hooked. And we re-rented it a week after week after week after week until eventually like we had rented it so many times that we just bought it. But it hooked me in a big way. So I probably played this game on the GameCube like 3 or 4 times to 100% completion. I played it through to 100% completion on the trilogy version like 7 or 8 years ago when I was living in the Central Coast of California. And I kind of felt like it was time for a replay in the last couple years, but when the rumblings of the HD remaster came out, I was like, I don't know, like pump the brakes a little bit. I'm going to wait and see see what happens. So that's where I'm coming at it from. And, say what you will, there's certainly some of that comes into play. Of course. And I have my gripes with parts of this game for sure. But like broad strokes, it's gonna be pretty favorable review.
I think it's hard for you not to have a rose-tinted visor, as it will.
I was talking to my buddy Brandon the other day, and I told him that I was playing through Metroid Prime for the podcast, and I told him about the top 100 games that we did and how this was, Chris, one of your favorite games ever. And Brandon was like, oh my God, I remember going over to hang out with Josh in like middle school, and Chris was always just sitting right in front of the TV playing Metroid, and he would fucking tell us about it. He was obsessed with it. I understand why this captured imaginations in 2002. I get it. It kind of drip feeds you everything about the world and the lore, and if that kind of thing gets you going, where you're like the weird kid who was on like Ask Jeeves trying to find like deep Dragon Ball lore, like I was back
Speaking
in the
truth
day.
to power here. Yeah, there you go.
How fucking dare you? How dare you tell the story of my life in bold fucking colors like this? I'm okay. You could, who did you talk to? Did you fucking talk to? Did you talk to Josh Joy about this? Because I swear to God, I would literally be.
You were writing fanfics, weren't you?
I was. I've said this on the air. That is not a gotcha. I still have all my handwritten fucking fan fiction in a little like folio in a box in Nana's attic. Yes, I do. I am not ashamed of that. But yeah, I was literally, boy, you've really activated a core memory of me like being at my 5th grade girlfriend's house and like printing out pictures from, it wasn't Google. I don't know where the fuck we found it in those days. It was the 90s of like Vegito and Majin Buu and just being like, oh my God. And like, this is how this happens and all these fucking things. So like, goddamn, like you got me right square on the chin with that one. Holy shit.
Anyway.
Oh man. Anyway, so I thought it'd be fun as we of the Console Crusade start to move in the direction of doing some reviews, maybe putting a little website together. I thought it'd be fun to do a 1-sentence review, each of us, for this game. Just right off the dome, just a little bit of like, if you could consolidate your feelings on this as you may articulate it in a caption for a review, a thumbnail on the homepage, like come see our review of this game. What would that sentence read?
So not the headline, but like the blurb right below the headline before the first graph.
Absolutely.
A true love letter to a bygone era. One that we don't necessarily need to resurrect.
That sounded like 2 sentences, but I'll allow it.
There's an M dash in the middle of that sentence.
Oh, big old M dash.
Cheater. I use and abuse that M dash, so I get it. Okay, go.
Okay, I've got a historic work worth revisiting, though a lack of quality of life features may leave newcomers high and dry.
Open critic, here we come. Chris is still thinking.
I'm just going to do it. I'm going to commit to the bit. The definitive edition of a seminal masterpiece.
I like it. I can get behind it. I mean, I can respect every single one of our opinions. Like, it is a smooth ass gradient.
That's what I was hoping for. That's exactly what I was hoping for. Like, we have laid the foundation for everything that's about to happen on this podcast so fucking clearly already. All right, great. Nick, I'd love for you and I, since this is a remaster, this is an update, an improvement in a lot of ways, on an existing game that already had a lot that was working well for it and a lot that certainly could have been improved, like the not quite tank look to move controls you were talking about. I'd love for us to talk a little bit about, as former players of this game, and you played it on the Trilogy Edition and then like some on GameCube too, what have they improved? Like, what is this remaster? What does this remaster bring to the table that helps this game be more accessible to a new generation, improves quality of life, even if there are things lacking, which we'll talk about later. And I have my own gripes. I just want that on the record many times, that while I am a homer, I am not like, I'm not
You're
that
not
bad.
in Retro's pocket necessarily.
No, I'm not. I wish I was, though. Send me merch, Retro Studios. So I think the controls probably a pretty significant place to start.
Sure, yeah, that's the obvious one. That is, besides the huge amount of work they put into the textures and the lighting of the world, it is the controls that make this a definite, like you said, this is the way to play this game. Like if you're going to play Metroid Prime, there is no reason to go back to the original. This is the new way to play that game.
Absolutely. The twin stick makes a world of difference.
And the original controls are also available if you so choose. And the Wii remote controls are available as well. Like they have everything. They have, I mean, you may not want to play that way, but somebody out there does, and having the option is never a bad thing.
I thought that was an admirable thing for them to nod to the sickos out there that are like, no, give me the GameCube controls. Or oh, I like the Wii one. I liked pointing, which like low-key I kind of did. Not as much as dual stick, but that was the definitive way to play it when that was the only way to play it, other than the GameCube. Oh God, you mentioned textures. Holy shit. Like I playing through this game and basically seeing some of these enemies for the first time because the textures were just like so crappy because that's just what was available at the time, you know, with the hardware.
Yeah, it was like a 480i on your crappy, you know, CRT. Nobody here was playing video games on like a PVM, right? So it's not like we were getting the crispest, most quality image to begin with. We were getting blurry JVC messes and we loved it. But that also came with the downside of when we're playing these like PS2, GameCube era video games, the texture qualities were so poor that you didn't know what you're looking at a lot of times, which could work for like, you know, being a kid and having an active imagination. Like, oh, I don't know what a space pirate really looks like, but it's scary and it's lunging at me. And you get the broad strokes of the animation of a scythe coming at you, but you don't know this creature has a face.
No.
But now we can see that creature's face because we have the definition, we have the high resolution, we have the texture work. The lighting, everything makes it so things are actually visible for once.
Yeah, God, those little burrowing beetles that you see in Magmore and also in Phendrana were literally, in my memory, were just like blobs of non-color, basically, on the GameCube version. I remember like scanning it the first time I encountered it in this game and going, holy shit, is that what that looks like? And there were so many moments, like you said, the space pirates, right? Where it's like, all of the whatever like trailing vapor thing they were trying to do on the GameCube coming out of their mouths just made everything so muddy. Now going like, oh, you have like eyes and a mouth and a nose and like you're just like a whole little fucking creature there. That's cool. And geez, the plated beetle is just so much cleaner and better looking. And I mean, all of it, like literally all of the textures, it's just night and day. It's a quantum leap.
It totally elevates the original work too, because you can go back and compare and be like, yes, that is what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
We just couldn't see it because we were looking through a shitty TV.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't change the like data as far as these are the same polygons on all these models, except for maybe the Samus model might have an improved model, but like everything else, like that is just what they are, but with improved textures.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just crazy that the game looked that good back then. Like this is a 2002 game. This game came out the same year as Halo. I don't know if you've looked at Halo recently. Also a great looking game, but like Halo 2 made a huge jump over the original.
Yeah.
And like this reminds me of how cool it would have been in something like this if they had done the thing that the Halo Master Chief Collection and the original anniversary release of Halo Remastered did, where you could actually like tab between the original graphics and the new version of the graphics. I always thought that was really cool. A totally unnecessary like cherry on top, but it would have been cool to see that in this version.
It's such a flex. That's all it is I'm literally just going like, look at how much fucking better we made all these textures look.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of here for it. Like if you're going to do that, like flex on them, let them know.
We've kind of talked about this on the podcast before, but like trying to define remake, remaster, what is a port, it's all kind of nebulous and none of the words really mean anything, but like this is a perfect example of like, we're not going to really change anything about the bones of this game. We're just going to make it look nice and run well. Here you go.
Yeah, that's a definition of a remaster as far as I'm concerned, is we are giving this a better coat of paint. We're putting a better engine under the hood, and it is going to be the experience you remember with some quality of life improvements. As opposed to a ground up remake, like having just played the Resident Evil 2 remake and like watching some YouTube videos of the original one, it's literally a different video game. Like from the ground up was totally reconstructed.
Yeah, it's tough because then you get into the point where what is a remake and like what is a complete like reimagining. I would sort of lump Final Fantasy VII remake. I know they literally put remake in the title, but I think that is a subversion of expectations because it is a completely different story in that game. And Resident Evil 2 has some like retcon stuff to make it fit in line a little bit more with like the more recent games. And Yeah, so it is weird where remake becomes a reimagining, but I think yes, this is a totally a like perfect example of a remaster where it is the bones of the original game, and this is just a coat of paint on top of it.
Right. Versus like what I would consider a lazy port when you look at Twilight Princess, you look at Skyward Sword, the Mario trilogy, which we've brought up at recent podcasts.
I think those all qualify as remasters, especially something like Skyward Sword, where it's actually running at twice the frame rate as it did originally.
All the assets are the same. Like we talk about, they're upscaling assets. They're identical assets. They're just not downsampled to be a certain resolution. Like they didn't remake anything.
I think some games, depending on their art style, lend themselves better to a full, Metroid Prime, the game keeps a lot of its vibe and aesthetic. They didn't do too much to it. You've seen some people, I remember there was consternation over the Mass Effect Legendary Edition, the trilogy remaster that they did a couple years ago, last year, I don't remember when it was. But they had done lighting passes that completely changed certain planets, and it gave it a different feel. And I don't think they did that with Metroid Prime. But I think it's really hard to do that with a dark and moody game. Whereas I don't think anything in Skyward Sword would have really benefited with an actual like redoing of the assets. I don't think there was anything to do there. Same with like Wind Waker, because Wind Waker was such a low asset kind of game. It is cell shaded. It is primarily polygons that you're looking at with a little bit of UI elements. And even then, the stuff they did with the bloom, I don't think added to the game. I think that is a aesthetic choice that they made, and it's a choice that I don't necessarily agree with, but I don't know, like that's still a remaster in my mind, because they didn't have to do as much work to make it running on a HD console and like smoothing out some of the edges. I don't know like how much of a quality of life I mean, video games get patches that just give them quality of life updates, but that doesn't make it a remaster if it's like
no, like looking at something like Xenoblade Remastered.
Yeah, where they actually added new models to the faces because the old ones were horrendous.
Right. They kind of do a few things in that regard, but then like when you zoom in on a texture and it's like, oh, that's clearly a low res texture from 2009 or whatever. And Zelda's the same way. Like some of the 3D assets are now being rendered in, I don't know, 720p or 1080p, who knows, but clearly some of the textures that they're just stretching. And that's the kind of thing. Like this is nothing in this game is reused. Everything was remade as if it were a new game in 2023. And that's awesome.
Which I think is like a high effort remaster, but
Yes.
I don't know if that necessarily disqualifies other video games from also being remasters, just maybe not as much love and care went into them, I guess.
And I don't want to play a game like, when I tried to play Twilight Princess on the Wii U, I was like, it looks like a GameCube game. Like technically you look at it side by side and you're like, oh, it looks better because there's a million more pixels, but like it's the same assets. Wind Waker, we've talked about, everything literally was remade. There's nothing reused in that game. Everything was recrafted, but you're also taking like a pretty low poly cartoon and making a low poly cartoon, so the jump wasn't as large, which is why they did all the lighting stuff. But it's crazy how much just a lighting overhaul can like dramatically change the feel of, a world's aesthetic, like you said.
And it's sort of like, a dog chase its tail that we just go in circles and go like, oh, but this would be, oh, and that would, oh, but this high and low quality sliding scales for sure.
This is the metric by which we judge all other ports, or not ports necessarily, but anything that calls itself a remake or a remaster.
Stop calling it a port. You've been doing this for like weeks where you're like, yeah, port this, port that. I'm like, no, stop. A port is the same fucking game being emulated on that fucking hardware. Like, it's insulting to me a little bit that I know you just use the terms interchangeably, but I've been like, bro, come on. Like, this is plainly not a port.
I take your meaning, but again, none of the words mean anything. Like literally, this is a port because it's the same engine, it's the same models, it's just new textures, right? So I guess I don't know. Anyway, I take your meaning, but this is how we should judge when Mario 64 got re-released. That bit should have had 3D world graphics. That should not have just been a fucking lazy upscale, Nintendo running everything through an AI generator and then giving us like this crappy ass 1998 looking ass video game and selling it to us for $70 or whatever.
To be fair, they didn't call it a remaster.
They didn't.
See, you're right.
I mean, I would love a Mario 64 remake, which would that's what I would expect from a Mario 64 remake, would be like newer models and stuff. But if they did a Mario 64 remaster, it would just be the same game but with better assets. And I don't really want that. Like that wouldn't scale up as well
No.
in a remake sense or a remaster sense. I think the older you get, the harder it is to justify a remaster, unless it is there was a series of games, I think it's like Wonder Boy, I think it was those ones, where they were pixel art games, but they were redrawing all the sprites and porting them. Like it's this weird sort of hybrid of like a port, remake, remaster kind of thing where it's all hand drawn. It looks beautiful, but underneath the game, like the visuals, is the original sprite art assets. So you could freely swap back and forth, like we were talking about with Halo.
Right.
You could freely swap back and forth between the original graphics and the new graphics, and it was the same game. It just looked completely different. So it's weird. There are some cases in which that works in a 2D aspect or in a game later than the year 2000. But N64 and PS1, I do not want to see those original models with like 4K assets. I don't want to see Crash Bandicoot wearing like realistic denim textured jorts, you know? That sounds like a nightmare.
No, it's like when I think of, the Spyro or the Crash, those were like proper remakes, but
Yeah, and I think those are actually the gold standard for remakes. And I do agree with you that this Metroid Prime remaster is like what we should be asking for out of remasters.
Yes.
right. That's a good delineation. When it comes to the graphics, like there is literally no chance, guys, that if Metroid Prime GameCube was on our list, there is no chance I could possibly beat that game. I know it's easy to sit here and talk about how graphics are important, and we could argue about like, well, if the game is good, the graphics don't matter. But like for my entire life, there is this slow sliding scale that as things get better and old things start to look worse, I cannot go back. A game looking nice in the current year goes such a long way. I mean, you can't make me play a really bad game that looks nice, but you also aren't going to get me to play a really good game that looks like shit most of the time. And so this is like targeted right at people like me who are like, all right, I'm going to give this a go. This looks like it should look in the current year. It looks gorgeous on the OLED. This is a fucking stellar handheld game.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's super fascinating, EJ, because I think there are people that are more able, I don't know what the right way to phrase this is, more adept, more capable, I guess, of playing old games and putting themselves in that sort of mindset where you're not asking for the new thing from the old thing. You're just sort of coming at it on its own terms. I don't think that's a downfall of you as a person. I think that's just a ability that certain people have where they can sort of go back to old games. I think I have a lot of that ability. I know other people do as well, but that is a very interesting sort of perspective to come at it from.
You know when I can forgive it? Like we've talked about this recently too, about even the Game Boy filters on the Switch. Oh, this takes me right back to where it should be. I don't want to play an N64 game blown up on a 4K television. It's wretched. I want to play it with fucking scan lines and little dots and some fuzzy interference, like because that's what those games looked like. Filters are one way that I can totally get around those kind of things. And on the other hand, remakes like this.
Yeah, if they weren't intended to be consumed in a certain way, it just looks weird. It just looks weird. I totally get that. Like I'd rather drag the CRT out of Nana's garage when I go over to play Mega Man X than I would like throw it on mom's Samsung. Like it's just
1,000%.
It's just off. It still looks good, but it's just like it's just something's not quite right.
Especially with like a game that's targeting a specific display, like a handheld game does, like a Game Boy or Game Boy Advance game. Those were all supposed to be played on that display. So if you're not looking like that display, then it becomes very jarring. I agree with you, EJ.
I'm praising Metroid here, guys. I'm praising.
You
I'm
are,
heaping
and
praise here.
And now I'm scared to get into the next section because I know where this is going to go.
Before we go into any next section, just talking about the visuals, how do you feel about the lack of the beam putting off light when you're like holding a charge beam? That was in the original and it is somehow missing in this version.
Yeah, there's a couple things like that I was sort of like, I wonder why that's not there. Like the first thing that made the rounds was the mirrors don't reflect Samus anymore. And like they never really reflected Samus. It reflected like a very polygonal, unmoving.
Yeah, like a weird JPEG.
Crappy, yes, exactly, of Samus. But it was a neat thing. And like that's missing. A lot of the reflective elements are missing. Like in Fendrana's Edge when you're rolling through one of these ice tunnels, and you've got like the sick ass spider ball, and you're throwing light everywhere. You would see the spider ball like reflected on both sides of the ice. They cut that.
Yeah, so I wonder if it's just like a update in their rendering pipeline that became unfeasible or what. But it's especially noticeable with the beam not emitting light because there's so much physics-based lighting in this game now that there are areas that are so freaking dark, and until you get the thermal visor or the X-ray visor, you just can't see where you're going. And like that's cool to an extent. Like it's cool to not be able to see like a little bit, but it's not cool when you're navigating and you're just like, oh, now this is just annoying. Like a little bit goes a long way when it comes to pitch black, and Metroid is a dark game. And I just think if there's this area, I can't remember, it's in Talon. It's the room where you're going up. You go up and down this fucking room all the time. At the bottom of the room, there's a bunch of the little beetles that pop out.
It's the root
But
cave.
there's this like corner, there's a blind corner that every time I went past it, I'm like, this is pitch black and this sucks. And that shouldn't be my feeling. I should be able to like charge my beam and see around me because that's the way it was in the original.
That's really interesting that I had no visibility issues with this game at all. I wonder if it's a difference in television thing.
It literally is. This game forced me to go actually do some research on both my television settings for making a device that only outputs between like 540 and 1080 sometimes. But also getting the RGB full versus auto. You never want it on auto. You want to choose limited or full. I had the same problem, Nick, until I got my TV and my Switch synced up to the way it should be. And on my bedroom TV, it's on limited, and on my 4K, it's full. But you have to make sure your TV settings are correct, and that fixed. Because there were literally parts where it was pitch black. I was like, dude, this cannot be the way they want me to play this game. This is terrible. And once I got all that calibrated, and messed with a few things, I was like, okay, this is what it looks like on the OLED when I'm playing handheld.
Right.
But very noticeable in this game in a way that I've never had to think about in 6 years with the Switch.
I'm not one of those people that messes with the in-game lighting sliders because I'm not a bitch. I play my games the way the developers intended, which is
Big
usually
facts.
pretty dark, but like,
Yeah.
especially, From Software games, people turn the brightness up because they want to see everything. I'm like, no, surprise me. I'm fine with that. This is the first time I've experienced anything like that with my Switch setup on my TV. So maybe that's a possibility, and I just never ran into anything like this before.
It's
I
wild.
needed to do some more research, apparently.
Yeah, and to your point, sort of overall, Nick, that it is a dark game. Like it's a Metroid game, and so it's going to be moody and atmospheric, and they're going to want you to be in relative darkness. But yeah, that was really interesting to hear that y'all had that. Of course, like on the OLED, like it's just fucking chef's kiss all the time. Like, I'm not gonna say this made the purchase worth it alone, but I mean, between like that and Dread, it certainly went a long fucking way. You know what I mean? Like, those are good looking games. The beam not casting light, it's like it's a minor thing. If
It's a minor thing, but it being like the only thing that is like missing from the original makes it kind of glaring, in my opinion.
that's true, and there's some stuff that was not in the original that was in the Wii version that they brought over still, like button jumping with the morph ball. You could not do that shit on the GameCube. You had to use the bombs. And in the Wii version, you could waggle the Wiimote to jump. I think that's how you did it, was waggling the Wiimote, which was, better, but having it on button is best. And some stuff that they took out in the Wii version that they put back sort of randomly, like your beams causing ripples on the surfaces of water. They pulled that from the GameCube version for the Wii release and then put it back for this one. I have no fucking clue what the thought process was, to be totally honest with you. It's weird to me.
It seems like they just chose a version that had the most stuff and sort of stuck to that version, because this also has the PAL release stuff like the narration, the optional narration, the optional Samus narration in the beginning as well, which I was baffled by. I didn't even know there was that. Like,
I have
as a thing. Like,
never heard of this.
it's like there being 100 different releases of Blade Runner, where you're like, oh god, they did what? They had Harrison Ford describing the dream or whatever in one version because Ridley Scott got bent over by studio executives. But yeah, there's like a version of this game that I played. I played this version with the weird PAL narration, which was just like only in two spots. I think it was at the very beginning and at the very end, where it's like talking about Samus arriving on the spaceship or on the frigate. And then I didn't actually experience it in this version, but I have heard the original audio of was it I can't remember the actress's name. She recently took over as Bayonetta.
Oh, Jennifer Hale, yeah.
So FemShep also from Mass Effect, and she's doing a narration, like a sort of a written sort of tone piece at the beginning of some version of the game that I just didn't experience this time around. But yeah, it's weird that they chose this one because this also has the soft lock. I think I mentioned it in our text thread, but if you kill the Phazon pirate and do not pick up that artifact, and then you leave the room, the artifact despawns, and then you cannot finish the game.
That's in the game?
And that is in this version.
Wow.
Yes.
And they haven't
Wow.
patched it. Really?
Yeah, I don't think so. I haven't heard of any patches, but that was the version they chose. They chose that version because it had the most content, I guess, that they wanted to work off of.
But even then, like, they have some stuff from each version, so I don't think it's a matter of like picking it whole cloth. I think it's more of what you said that, and we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about this in a little bit. I will move us on, I promise. But I think that this is sort of like a beta for a possible Metroid Prime 4 engine that they really want to run in 60 frames at high quality at all times. And they're seeing what can work and what won't work.
Maybe a little bit. I don't know. It depends on their structuring. Like if they still do the same sort of room to room loading mechanisms that they had in this version, in which they improved upon in 2 and 3.
Yeah.
So that's like a possibility. But yeah, it is just strange. Like I wanted to focus on these weird nitty gritty kind of details before we dive into like the game as a whole, because this is a remaster and I wanted to talk at it like from that perspective, like the differences between the original and this one. And you're right, it is just weird that there are things from the Wii version, things from the GameCube version, things from the PAL version, a game-breaking bug from like the first version that got patched eventually in later releases. It's sort of like how Prime 2, like Chris, you're probably familiar with Prime 2 and the Boost Ball Guardian and how notoriously difficult that guy was to defeat.
God, yeah.
But then they patched it and made it a little bit easier, and then they kept that version for the trilogy release as well. These games, I mean, people talk about how patching games is like a new thing, but games got updates and they got different versions that just got released on later versions of the disc. It was just a less sort of broadcast fact for games back then. It is strange going back to, but yeah, there is a version 1.0.0 and a version 1.0.1, you know, all that kind of shit.
Whenever they're doing a game like this, especially when they're taking the engine and they pick a game to build this game off of, and clearly they chose the one with the soft lock and such and didn't fix it. But as far as the light not, coming off of the beam, like guaranteed that was just too much of a variable that would hurt the frame rate. Like you said, Chris, I am every podcast crying into the ether, begging studios to focus on exactly this. Do whatever you can in your game. I don't care what bells and whistles have to be dialed back. 60 locked, period. I don't care if there's a million fucking bugs coming at me. If that bitch dips, you have fucking failed. And I can't recall a single time where my frame rate dips in this game. And so if it sucks that like something is obviously noticeable to you, Nick, they had to strip out because of that. But the sacrifice would have been poof, 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 completely pinging back and forth depending on what gun you're firing, how many enemies are on screen. So like, I get it.
Yeah, and we don't know why it was not included, if it was a limitation of the frame rate or if it was just unfeasible. Like I'm not sure. It's just something I noticed that's not there. Like if the frame rate was bad, I would also be talking about that.
No, and I'm glad you're bringing it up. And I think that it speaks to how fucking good not only this game is and has been, but how good a job they did with this remaster, that we can really get into the weeds on some minute shit that if this game sucked, we wouldn't be talking about the beam not throwing light. We'd be talking about the fact that this game sucks. And so I think it's a credit to that.
Right. And also just a credit to the original having so much gangster shit on a GameCube. It's hard to make a video game. It's hard to make a remaster, but it's got to be easier working off of one of the best games on a platform, right?
Absolutely. I mean, like it's my buddy Nate was talking about it. I'm like, hey, you're gonna get the Prime 1 HD, right? So I'm like, everybody's got to buy one. We need those sales numbers so we get Prime 2 and Prime 3. And Nate's like, fuck no. I'm waiting for the trilogy because I know they're gonna fucking do it. I'm not buying this game twice. And I'm like, all right, fair enough. But I was sort of
Keep
like,
waiting.
oh my god, like it's getting great reviews. Oh, people are blowing up about it. And he was just very like nonchalant about the whole thing. Finally, I was like, did you like not like this game when it came out? I feel like I was talking about it. You really like this game? He's like, no, it's just fucking obvious. It's going to be a 10 out of 10. If you remaster a 10 out of 10 game and you do a good remaster, it's going to be a 10 out of 10 remaster. So I'm just like, yeah, it's going to be fucking gangster. I can't wait to play it, but I'm not buying it twice.
Well, rumor on the street is that the other two are not in the works. And depending on how this one sells, well, this is Nintendo. It's more likely that we never get the other two remastered than...
That's not what I'm hearing at all. That's not what I've ever been hearing. It's that 2 and 3 are very much in the works, but that they're not getting the full remaster treatment. That they're going to be much more akin to
Oh, stop.
like upscale
Don't do
ports.
That. Bad. Oh, especially after this. What a letdown.
Well, now I think they have no choice because they literally sold out their whole first run of this game and had to do a restock, which I don't think they particularly expected. #stealth drop out of a fucking Nintendo Direct, that the physical copy just absolutely sold out pretty much immediately. I think of course they will. Of course they will. There's clearly a market for it. There are clearly people that want these games on their Switch console.
Do we have updated sales numbers, or is this something we have to wait a few months for, Nick?
We'll have the fiscal year ending results, I believe, beginning of May.
Okay.
So sometime next week.
Cool.
Cool. We'll have to break that down.
When did Prime Remastered drop? That was like middle of February, right?
Mid-February
Right.
with the physical late February.
So that'll have a pretty good snapshot of like a month and a half on the market as far as how Prime Remastered's done.
And they don't track digital sales in these numbers still, right?
They do. They do personally. They provide their own numbers worldwide, and they also break it down by region. But if you're looking at NPD, or what was NPD but has now changed their name to something else, those only track physical. And Metroid Prime did chart in the top 20 the month it came out on like a 2-day sort of it was like pre-order numbers basically, and then it also tracked for March. So pretty good for a $40 game that's not being tracked digitally, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean it'll sell a couple million. It's not going to sell. It's not going to sell like fucking.
I think it would be good if it breaks 1 million.
Yeah, I'd be shocked if it broke. Like 1.2 seems optimistic.
Between physical and digital.
Oh, yeah.
I think breaking 1 million, it'll break 1 million, but I think that's a good result for Nintendo.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm remixing what I wanted to do with these next 3 sections because I know where the section that I was going to put here is going to go. And so here's what we're going to do. I want to start with stuff that we liked, which was my intention anyhow. And EJ, I want you to kick us off here specifically from your point of reference as a first-time player, because something that we've talked about a lot in the group chat, is that you don't feel that there is a review on the market and have done a fair amount of research, I would say, in trying to find a review of someone who is coming to this game for the first time who did not play the original one. So I want you to speak to that as a first-time player. What did you dig about this game? Like, what are you vibing with? What are you fucking with? And then in a second, we'll get into what you don't vibe with, which I am intentionally saving for almost last because I know we're going to fucking kill each other. And I want to spend those tokens intentionally so that this isn't just 2 hours of us screaming at each other. So what you like, man? And I know there's stuff you liked. You talked about it a lot already, but kick us off as a first-time player.
Yeah, I wanted to come into this. I know we've joked a lot about doing exactly that, where we're just gonna fucking fight over I'm like, this game is old and shitty, and you're like, this is a masterpiece. It's a modern classic. I really did try to go into this very intentionally, thinking about this as a game that was made and released for the first time this year. As someone who plays games, I like other Metroid games. I don't like backtracking, but I love the action of a 2D Metroid game. And so I came in with a little bit of knowledge, and I think you said it yourself, Metroid Prime is exactly what you would expect from a 2D Metroid game being turned into a 3D game. I don't know if I agree with that, but I will say the only thing coming into this, just trying to evaluate it as a newcomer and as a modern experience, the only thing that I thought was exceptional was the music and the sound design. Just immaculate vibes. There was one section I texted you guys about where I was at the very beginning of the frigate and I'm underwater still and I'm powering up all the whatever.
The piano trills.
Bro, it's just like some
Oh.
lo-fi vibes. I just normally, when I play a game like this, I really want to know how long it takes me to beat. So I always make sure to go to the home screen instead of pausing or leaving it just, in the overworld because I don't want my in-game timer to get fucked up. Bro, I was on that frigate and I was just vibing and I checked my phone and I texted you guys and I just left that shit on for like an hour. I was just like in the vibe with that shit.
Did you listen to the cover that I sent you? Oh, don't say no. Don't say. Oh, man.
I'm sorry. I was
Dude.
not in a place I could listen to it and then I never went back to it.
Listen to it and maybe you can pull a little snatch of it to use for something in the intro. I don't know. It's a fucking great cover of that.
Well, it's funny because I've played a lot of Smash Bros. So the vibe of Metroid is something that I've been experiencing since I was like pre-puberty.
I do not know what you mean. I need you to clarify that. That is like, that's wild. That's like saying I played Smash Bros. So I get the vibe of Kirby. Like, absolutely not. What? Like, I don't.
The music and the aesthetic. You drop in and the soundtrack's playing and you're like, this is a bop. So now I jump into Metroid for the first time and I'm like, this feels very familiar, even though I've never been here before. Because this music I've been listening to for 20 years is playing in the background. I don't mean like the vibe of the
I get
game. Nick, you know what I'm saying.
No, I know exactly what you mean. I mean, that is our collective unconscious getting a first taste. Like Smash Bros is the way we got introduced to half of the franchises in Smash Brothers.
Absolutely.
Right. So it was nice to like feel like I was in a familiar place. And the Metroid music is just so great. But then the sound design between the different weapons that you're switching between in your arm cannon, some of the like musical, like the motifs that like reoccur when certain enemy types show up. Dude, when you like drop into a room and you forget which room you're running into and the fucking Chozo ghosts pop up again, you hear that, you're like, fuck, not again! And it's like so intense. Like, God damn it. Those fights got so much easier with that X-ray visor. I was just like,
Oh, yeah.
God.
buddy. Oh, buddy.
Those are the only things to me that I really appreciated. And I was like, this shit holds up. And I don't know to like what degree the music was reimagined or remastered, re-recorded. I don't know. Do you guys?
Very lightly, I think.
Yeah, there's some stuff that I was sort of like, I have never, and I played this game again like 8 times. Like, I've never heard this little like strain or interpolation coming through in like walking through the Chozo ruins. Where I was like, I don't think they rescored it. I don't think that they did anything like super meaningful, but maybe like a little bit of a change in the mix to account for like modern sound systems. Because I was definitely hearing some stuff I hadn't heard before.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of that is just how we have better sound systems now. Like, I think this game was optimized for 5.1 surround sound back in 2002, but none of us here had that. Like, we were playing off of, 23-inch CRT TV speakers, most likely. So I think a lot of what you hear is just you hearing it for the first time because you actually have the appropriate hardware to do so.
Right. So yeah, that was great. I like appreciated. There were a couple hours I played this game where I just was in the loop and I was just really bored and it felt like a task that I was just, reluctantly crossing off of a checklist. I was like, all right, we're going to unlock this thing to open this door, yada, yada, yada. So then I had to kind of start thinking about like, what is it that Chris and Nick love so much about this? And so I started paying more attention to the lore. Not that I was like skipping over it, but I was like, okay, random sci-fi name, like the Ooga Boogas are fighting the Gimli Goops, and it's like, it's all just fucking bullshit. So I was like, all right, I'm going to take my time and like think about this a little more intentionally. About halfway through, I was like, okay, I understand why this captured the imagination of 10 or 11 or 12-year-old Chris, and why this is so well regarded, because games weren't really doing this back then. You know what I mean? I think there's a conversation to be had about like, is that what I would want out of a game nowadays? Probably not. The way that lore is communicated and how explicit the story is. There's a lot of cool stuff here. And obviously I don't have the background of the entire Metroid franchise. I'm sure it is a very deep well.
You don't need much outside of knowing that the Chozo that's the species that Samus got her power suit from, which you probably knew already, and that this is just a particular tribe that inhabited this planet and like lived in harmony with the Earth. Which you get out of the lore. Like, you pretty much get everything you need out of the lore.
You don't really need to have previous knowledge of the franchise to appreciate the story that this game is telling. There's like little Easter eggs. Like, it's cool that this planet is in the same solar system as Zebes, but that is not necessary to the story.
Well,
right?
yeah, and then it clues you out that literally Samus is like gets out of Zebes, the base explodes, and she gets this transmission that it's like a direct sequel because you're literally in the same star system, and that this is just an arm of which again you don't need to know, but this is just another arm of the Space Pirates operation in this solar system that they were also working on some stuff in Talon 4. On working on researching what they were finding over there in case the Zebes thing went tits up, which it did. And getting the tracking the messages through of like, oh, the hunter, came in and like fucked up our shit in Zebes, and oh fuck, the hunter's here, like put everything in lockdown, and then fuck, she's breaching all of our shit, like we can't slow her down, we can't stop her, and just like getting that in real time as you're just like blowing through these different research facilities. You get that without needing to know that like they're public enemy number one and that Samus is fighting them, and like you don't need to know any of that, but it is nice if you do know it to go, oh, that's fucking cool. Like,
yeah, it is very like novel the way they tell a remarkably linear story throughout the context of you just reading these notes. It's only through reading that you get the story of this game, and it's optional, it's background noise, it's like you get out of it what you put into it. So you get sort of trappings of that in newer games like Dark Souls, but a lot of things that newer games would do would be like an audio log. Like I think of BioShock. That is the modern equivalent of the way this game told its story.
I really fucking appreciate the fact that this game doesn't have fucking audio logs. I cannot hold two distinct and different auditory stimuli without completely shutting down and not being able to process either of them. That is a me thing. I know that that's a me thing. I'm sure there are others who feel similarly, but trying to listen to an audio log in BioShock while I'm getting fucking attacked by slicers and a Big Daddy is my own private hell, because I miss the log completely. I get my shit fucked up because I'm trying to focus on the log, and then I just have to go back and listen to it afterwards anyway. And I'm like, I hate it. I really, really hate it. But I'm a reader. I've always been a reader. To be able to just like scan, lock in, and even if there are fucking space pirates shooting at me, I am in this moment of the log has been downloaded and I can read the fucking log and I can go back to combat. I really appreciate it.
Off the top of my head, I can't think of a game that I actually like the audio. So like Spider-Man's the only game where I thought the audio log concept was done well, and that is only really because like you spend so much of that game swinging around listening to people talk at you. The same concept, but you actually have time to digest it. Because I'm with you, Chris. Normally I just tune that shit out, or like I have to put subtitles on, and so like I'm trying to do something and read subtitles and it's playing. It's just a fucking nightmare. So I'm totally with you. This is just a me thing. I want a game's story and lore, if it exists, to be explicit. I don't like the Dark Souls thing. We're like, oh no, it's deep, it's there, but you have to like, that's not for me. I like the idea of all these logs that you're scanning and reading. If there was a more explicit story that you're experiencing, and I'm not saying it needs to be The Last of Us with these fucking cutscenes and like whatever, but like something that is very clearly happening in the overworld to you as you were progressing through this game, and then all of that was like supplemental. That's when I geek out about that stuff. I don't like that it's optional, that if I hadn't read any of that shit, I would just be like, I am literally walking in circles, unlocking new weapons so I can open new colored doors. Like, this is fucking insanely inane. So anyway, obviously, again, this is 2001 we're talking about. Games barely had stories back then. 2002, whatever. Like,
it was basically just like RPGs, and even then, that is the way a story is told in a role-playing game is kind of takes its lineage back to Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop role-playing games, which are highly sort of riffing off of like Lord of the Rings. So it was more fantasy stuff. So you got like big epic stories, but in such a small context that, yeah, I don't know what like the best story in a game before the year 2000 was.
It required so much more imagination then. So when people talk about these classic RPGs and like what an epic it was,
like at best it was like a really decent season of an anime. Like I think of like Chrono Trigger like as being, do people really love Chrono Trigger because of the story or because of like the way it's contextualized its story through time travel and the way you impacted it with your choices? Like it was the choices that made that story interesting to people.
Right. This was something as a collector, I would go back to these 16-bit era RPGs, and I'm like, this is so thin. This is not what people have been building up for years or like projecting onto me. Like this is
Plus, a lot of those games being Japanese and being poorly translated in like
Right.
the early
Yeah.
90s, like that does not help either.
Final Fantasy VI holds up. I just played that.
is that on
like,
our list?
It's in the top 10. It's in the top.
Yeah.
It's at number 6.
I think the Pixel remaster has the newer translation too, which
It does.
people do fuck with, and reorchestrated music, which sounds fantastic.
Oh my
And
god.
an HD 2D.
Sorry, this is not even remotely related. EJ, I totally get you. We need to have like story, and if the story's good, then I want to scan all of the things. Like that's I get the point you're making. I can respect that.
And that incentive never really developed for me.
Chris, I wanted, since you got EJ's perspective from a first-time player, I wanted to quickly with you talk about not necessarily just the good things, but just talk about the things that stuck out to you. What were you paying attention to? What was the, coming back to this game? Obviously, you've played this game 700-800 times, and I want to know like what's your like top level takeaway from replaying this game in 2023?
It really is a beautiful, lovingly designed world. And that is and a beautifully remastered version of this world that would look impressive on like high definition televisions. Because that's what got me, besides the soundtrack, which EJ talked about, which is again just like absolute like goated god tier soundtrack.
Cheap pop, like that's an easy win, just hearing the music again, obviously.
Yeah, where I'm just like, oh yeah, just like straight, just pure heroin right into the veins. But it's this how beautiful and lived in and interesting this world is. Like walking through the Talon overworld, and it's just this lush jungle, and you hear like the rumble of thunder, and the rain is falling really gently, and you see all the little raindrops, and like all the plants look like plants now instead of like blocky polygons, and the way that everything is so interconnected with nature, all these different structures, and getting into the Chozo ruins again, and all of those little banners that are in Chozo text that you can scan, and you'll see like walls like covered in runes, and just a sense of like this had such a rich lived history. That's what made me originally want to use the scan visor so much and go like, what is that? Oh my god, like I don't have to wonder. I can just find that out. I can just scan it. You can't scan everything, but like damn near. That's the big thing for me. Like nothing compares to like getting into Phendrana Drifts that first time and hearing those first few notes and seeing the camera like pan out and sweep over this just very, very different thing that we've seen so far in this game, and how like soft and peaceful, and the boots crunching on the snow, and it just envelops you in a way that every Metroid game should, 2D or 3D, because that was what separated Metroid in the original days, is how like atmospheric it was. And I thought that they translated that beautifully to 3 dimensions. And coming back to it, yeah, it felt like visiting an old friend, like seeing the planet rendered in high definition for the first time from orbit, and seeing the frigate, and like here comes the ship, and those first few strains of Samus's theme. I was like, oh my god, like I'm emotional, like I'm overcome a little bit. Just knowing this world is still here for me. That's the big stuff. I appreciate more as an adult now how not genre specific it is, that there's some platforming that works like surprisingly well in the first person. There's puzzle solving. Yes, you have to shoot. It is a shooter, technically speaking, but you don't need to worry about ammo. So it's a lot more about putting the right shots in the right place with the right weapon. And it just does all of them. It just does all of them really, really well. And I appreciate that more now, because I just don't know that there's anything quite like that still.
Right on. The thing that really stuck out to me approaching this game was how obvious it is that they wanted to make Super Metroid, but in 3D. Like, just from getting to the Talon overworld, it being a rainy location with the music sounding like the Talon overworld, like not the Talon, but the Zebes like surface theme. It's like note for note almost. Even like starting on a space station having an escape sequence, landing on a planet, and then delving into the planet. Like, it is Super Metroid, like, verbatim. And I found that really interesting because obviously they're coming at this game, like, that was like 7 years after Super Metroid came out. This, like, at that point, revered cult classic that was regularly topping like game magazines, the relevant source for game opinions at the time, like top 100 lists. Like, the Super Metroid was the number one game to a lot of outlets.
And if you recall, this was originally conceived, and Unseen 64 has so much fucking material on Metroid Prime. This was originally conceived as a third person, I don't know if over the shoulder or just straight up third person sequel to Super Metroid. That was what this was originally conceived as until, God, I don't think it was Miyamoto. It was somebody internal at Retro was like, I think we need to move this in a different direction, and made the switch to first person. But there is tech videos from E3 of Metroid Prime in third person.
Well, from interviews I remember, like, I wonder if that was a Nintendo developed project, because from interviews I remember was Retro had a slate of games that they were working on. They were working on like a sports title, a fantasy game, and a first person shooter. And they showed all of them to Nintendo because they were working on a relationship with them. And Nintendo was like, hey, you should turn that first person shooter into a Metroid game. And they're like, you want us to do what? You want us to make that into Metroid, one of the best games of all time? Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, that is an impossible task. And they somehow managed to do it. A developer that is like made up of ex Iguana staff or whatever, like some unknown Texas studio working with the Nintendo, to make a sequel to Super Metroid, one of the best games of all time. Like, and it's a first time development studio. They haven't put out a game before. I can only imagine the kind of stress they were put under. But yeah, I think they took a million notes from Super Metroid, and I think they nailed it. Like, I think it's it's unsung how good the writing is in this game. Like, it's so brief. You don't need a lot to say a lot, but I think the writing does a excellent job of establishing a voice for Samus as she explores this world. Like, you can hear her thought process as she's evaluating these items. Like, it is very, factual, and it's just straightforward. It is just so proficient. Like, this is a person who's done this countless times, and it's just another day at work for Samus. Just categorically going through this planet and just eviscerating it, and also being a detective, like, via the visors. Like, a lot of what you're doing in this game is more akin to a Zelda than a Metroid game. In Metroid games before, it was never solving puzzles. Like, that was never a tenet of the Metroid games before this one. And once you're in a 3D environment, you get a better sense of location. So since you have that location, you have perspective now, and you can finally, like, line things up. You can look at things from different angles, and you see things in new ways. And I think them leaning into that aspect of Metroid was a really smart idea, because the combat in Metroid games is never really good, like, except for Dread. I think Dread is like the one standout example of there being good combat in a Metroid game.
Yeah.
Before, it's just exploration, you like noticing things and like seeing, oh, this room is kind of set up strange. I wonder how I get to that thing that I see over there. Like, I can see something. How do I get there? And Metroid Prime kind of takes that and does the Zelda thing where it's like, obviously I know there's something to do here, and you got to figure out what you're doing. And sometimes that's like a cool little morph ball jump. Sometimes it's just scanning something and just reading about it and getting a short little tweet, 140 character blurb about this cool little bit of phazon oozing out of the moss and sort of teasing you along and sort of setting the seeds of intrigue, because a lot of this game's sort of storytelling is like a mystery. You're on this planet. You don't know why the space pirates are here. You've got this weird glowing nuclear shit, and they're talking about having Metroids, and you're like, oh God, that's the name of the game. I wonder if we're going to be fighting Metroids. And yeah, you do, obviously. But it's just sort of like it's intriguing, and it's pulling you along, and hearing you say, EJ, that you weren't like pulled along by the writing and like the notes. I cannot I cannot relate to you in any way in that regard. Like, I think the writing of this game is the reason why it's fun to play.
I do get what you're looking for ideally, EJ, and I totally agree with that. And the more a story really engages me, the more I'm gonna read things. Like, oh God, I can't even think of what I was playing recently that I was just like, and I'm not reading that, and I'm not reading that, and I don't care about that, and I'm not reading that. Like, I was just like, I don't care. Like, I'm playing this to beat it. I don't give a shit about any of this other stuff. I did a really quick Google on UNC64, and yeah, it was reconfigured-ish out of one of their pitches, but it was going to be a third-person shooter. It was not going to be a first-person shooter till they were like pretty solidly into development, and then they made the pivot out of it. Oh boy. Well, I suppose I can't avoid it any longer. EJ, you have been a saint for playing a game that we all know that despite your best and earnest intentions to go into with a clear mind, you were gonna fucking hate. And you have been a saint so far in this podcast of meeting out your opinions. And I think that in a similar vein, we've done a really good job of having like pretty mature and well measured discourse about this game. So let's take the fucking kid gloves off, and I'd like to hear what you really think. And I can't promise I'm not going to interrupt you.
Here's the thing. I don't hate this game. I just don't like it. And I think my reaction to it is more about the idea that this is not just one of the best games of all time, but in the upper echelon of the best games of all time. We've talked about it in the past of like games that hold up, games that don't hold up. My whole, I don't know, not like my thesis when like postulating about this game, but like I really am convinced that this game is so fondly regarded because of it's a time and place thing, the kind of people who are playing it at that snapshot in video game history. And so going into it, trying to think to myself, like, okay, what makes this good now? While also trying to be cognizant of like why this was so seminal for so many people back then. And I feel like that I understand now. I have no qualms with the idea that like, you know, this basically helps spawn, you know, an offshoot of this genre that has sort of, I don't want to say stood the test of time, but like people want more of this. And I don't understand why after having played it, but I understand the idea that like the way we felt then is so important to what we think we want now. And replaying this game for you guys, I mean, it's a love letter to this game. And I understand that if you've played this in the past and loved it, like this is now the definitive way to play it. But I don't think there was a single moment in this game where I was like, I am having fun with this. The action, there's no reason to have guns in this game except for to open doors. Like, I don't need enemies in this game unless it's like the bosses were fine. I haven't played the final bosses. I'm assuming I have 2 bosses left before I complete the game. But the bosses were fine. Otherwise, there's just no need to have enemies. And I know this is just a relic of like, again, a bygone era. Fucking enemies respawning every time you re-enter a room is just fucking terrible. I want to go through and systematically clear things out. And then like my reward as I backtrack and explore this place is like, I already did the hard work here. I don't want to have to redo the hard work every time I backtrack to an area. I already did this. Don't like that. But I basically, to be as reductive as possible, I basically felt like I spent 12 hours walking in circles, unlocking different colored doors, and every time there was like a major upgrade, all it really did was unlock more doors. Sometimes the enemy colors changed, but all the enemies are functionally identical. So it's like, oh, I gotta think about it, and I gotta switch mid-fight. Oh, now a yellow one dropped down. Shit, I mid-fight gotta try and fumble and switch to a different weapon type. But they all do the same thing. And I don't want to hold this like against a 20-some-year-old game, right? Like, I understand where games were then. So it's kind of hard to like be like, that's bad because that's what they were doing in 2002. Like, that's what they were doing. That's what it is. But it is interesting to me in looking at what Metroid can be in the future. And I have 2 sort of branches when I start to think about that. One is like, what does a faithful Metroid Prime 4 look like? And then what does a reimagining of this world look like in a modern game? And I've been thinking about that a lot because, like I said, the combat doesn't really matter in this game. The platforming largely felt pretty awful. And again, it's like how much of that is just like bad FOV and like old physics and like whatever, right? It's just an old game. To me, the action and the platforming should be as important as like a fucking sick narrative and deep lore. From what I understand, and correct me if I'm like misrepresenting your view on this, the world is kind of what you're here for, right? It is its own character.
I mean, if you're gonna put it in like the most reductive and potentially gotcha way possible, maybe, but to like broaden that a little bit, yes, it's learning about what happened in this place, because of how like well designed and beautiful and interesting the world is, but it's also the Metroid shit of going, on the space station, I had a thing that would let me swing from something that looks like that. How do I get that thing so I could go over there and find the stuff that's over there? It's the mystery of it, and making mental notes and going, oh, now I can go back and do that, and uncovering what happened on the planet and what happened to the Chozo here. Bringing in like prior series knowledge and later replays of the fact that they're like pretty much gone everywhere. Yeah, and like, what does a space pirate base of operations look like? Yeah, I mean, it's all of those things. It's all of those things.
Those are important things that need to be there in a good game. But at every moment, I felt like, Nick, you kind of said it, where it's like, I know what I need to be doing here because I need to unlock the next weapon that's right up there that's going to unlock the next colored door so that I can do that again 6 more times so I can fight the final boss. Okay. So that makes everything in my way feel extremely tedious because the sort of rewards that I'm getting for accomplishing these tasks don't feel like rewards to me. They feel like just a key to unlock the next tedious but pretty much similar thing to what I've been doing for 6 hours already. And this could also be me just like coming into this poisoned by this formula because I've played it 100 times. And the reason that something like a roguelite really gets me is that it's different every time. You know, my own sort of hang-ups about like doing things methodically. You can't play fucking Metroid methodically. Like you have to go from A to Z and then fucking back.
This is one of the most methodical genres on planet fucking Earth. Get out of here with that. If you're not methodical, that's how you end up with like 60 missiles against the Omega Pirate, Mr. Man. Like,
okay, I have 145 missiles. Okay, thank you very much.
that is respectable.
But I mean, we've talked about it before. I mean, methodical in the sense of like, I'm going to go clear an area. I'm going to go find all of its secrets.
You don't want to work for it. I get it. Like, this is why you don't like Metroid. You want to be able to, or Zelda for that matter. Like, the only game you really like in that franchise, as far as I can tell, is Wind Waker, which is one of the most like baby mode Zeldas in terms of like difficulty of dungeons and stuff.
EJ, I understand what you're saying in that you want to be methodical the first time you enter a room and then never enter that room again. And that's what it really boils down to, is you do not enjoy the genre-defining feature of a Metroidvania in which you enter a room and you see that there are things to get, but you cannot get them yet because you're not powerful enough yet. You do not have the necessary things to do that. And that is different than what you're saying, because you're saying methodical, but that is another part of methodical. You just want it to be the first time through. And like, I get that. I understand that. But the way you're phrasing it triggered Chris, and I could see that because he's starting to attack your favorite game.
Yeah, you can't do it all at once. Yeah, I mean, it is a split in how do you want to clear a room. Do you want to be able to just do it all at once in the case of like a roguelike or a roguelike or a dungeon crawler, right? Like I'm playing Moonlighter right now and I love being able to just like go in a room, kill all the things, get all the stuff. The enemies are not coming back. I'm moving on. It's done. It's over. I get that. The delayed reward of I can't do this yet doesn't hit for everybody. I respect that. I'm just not going to go so far as to say like that makes it dated or a time and place thing. It just makes it a genre you don't enjoy, but it does it at a high level in this game.
Like I said, it'd be as reductive as possible. It's just like the platforming isn't there. The action isn't there. The story is very surface level. I appreciate, Nick, what you said about how Samus's personality comes through as you scan things and you like read. essentially her internal monologue is she's like recording these things. Like that's cool. Definitely not enough on its own to be like, yep, this is like in 2023 the thing that's going to keep me engaged with this game. Again, on a surface level, I like some of the things, the vibe of the world, some of the enemy types. I'm like, okay, like this is interesting. I could see what this could become in like a more realized modern experience. But otherwise, yeah, I just the world didn't excite me, and I was just annoyed every time I had to switch my weapon. You know, and then as I started unlocking sick fucking weapons, and I actually kind of got excited. Like you get the flamethrower, and you get the fucking plasma. Is it the plasma beam?
So fucking broken. Like once you get that, I mean, this is the thing when you're talking about like, oh, I don't want to go back into these rooms. I did this work already. Getting back into the Chozo Ruins to like do some item cleanup or to grab an artifact with the fucking plasma beam, you feel the sense of progression. That is what the reward for exploration is you go back and you fucking incinerate bitches. Going through Magmore Caverns and all those fucking flying pirates and Phendrana Drifts are just like shelling the shit out of you, and they dodge your missiles and they dodge your super missiles. One plasma beam charge shot and they literally like burn to a cinder, and you're like, God damn, I am yoked out. And that's the reward. That's the loop. The loop is coming back and going, I am so much stronger than I was before. That's why it's worth doing. And frankly, like if you don't, you're going to be pretty spongy with some of these later bosses. Like you're going to have a hard time with some of these bosses with 145 missiles. You'll be okay, but you're going to have a hard time.
That reminds me of another thing that annoyed me to no end is how seemingly few stations there are for replenishing your missiles, and that we have save stations that replenish everything, and then we have missile stations that don't save but just replenish your shit. There's nothing worse than getting to a spot where like I need to use my power bomb to explode some rocks. I don't have any power bombs left, and I look at my map and I'm like, I have to go all the way fucking back there to get a refill on my shit, dude.
Yeah, luckily the one spot where you need power bombs to get in and out of, there's like a infinitely respawning little beetle that crawls out of a hole, and you're just like, I'll just shoot this guy for a while and get my power bombs back.
There's stuff everywhere.
Well, that's the thing. How many times I re-enter a room to explode all the crates in the room, and then there's nothing but fucking little red energy balls, and I have to leave, kill all fucking 8 enemies that are in that room again. Like third time you finally come back in, kill the enemies the third time. You're like, oh my God, a single power bomb drop.
How are you running out of power bombs? Because you literally know everywhere to power bomb by using your fucking scan visor for Bendezium.
I power bomb fission Metroids because they suck, and I hate fighting them.
But at that point, I have like 8 of them, and every power bombable wall except for like 2 that I could think of.
Power bomb upgrades are a lot fewer and far between than the missile upgrades. Like if EJ has 145 missiles, how many power bombs does he have? Like 4 or 5?
If you're using power bombs on power bomb walls, you're getting power bomb expansions 85 to 90% of the time. So like I don't know how you're running out so fast unless you're just power bombing everything instead of shooting it for the fuck of it. Like I don't know.
I feel like there was like at least 3, maybe 4 just today that I exploded and was like, oh, that's just the map download. Like I beat my head against the wall to get the map, but I would literally, that was the loop I was doing, trying to find one power bomb.
Yeah, when you first get it right there, yeah, you get that power. Yeah, and there's another one where you get the flamethrower in the tunnels.
Right,
ice spreader.
That's another one that I got today. But also half the time, I just fucking hit the wrong button and I'll fucking power bomb instead of like unmorph or like. I'm trying to drop a regular bomb and Chris, I did what you said where I put my bomb on X instead of bumper.
Good. And
it's like, sometimes it is really good and sometimes it's really fucking annoying because I can't confuse my bumper, but I confuse that goddamn X. I just
X and Y, yeah.
That's clusterfuck.
I get that, but that's not the game's fault. Like I get it.
No, it is like retrofitting. I mean, as much as I do like the twin stick controls, I think I never felt fully comfortable with the like I tried it the original way where it's visors on D-pad and then you hold L and then it's visors on or beams on D-pad, and then I swapped it and both ways felt like I was missing something. And I wish they would have sped up the animation for switching between beams because it always felt way too slow. And I don't know why the power beam, you fire 4 shots before you start charging. Like that seems like an unnecessary little thing. I don't know. I don't remember if that was in the original, but there's small things that they could have improved in the controls still.
Some of it I don't know if it's just okay. This is very Metroid like, and I don't like those things. How much of it is this is just old and I can't really complain about it because it is literally a fucking old game, and that is just what it is. And so it's sort of hard to parse that out, and that's why I can't really get angry at it. I'm just like, this game, didn't really move me at any point. Something that I wanted to bring up, Chris, we don't have to rehash it because I wasn't angry or anything, but you made a couple of smart ass comments on the last podcast. And something that I just wanted to clarify, because I've made this comment to you on the podcast before where I say, like, you're an ideas guy. If the idea is cool, you're all in on it. And then I argue that it wasn't executed well, and then you argue that it was executed well because obviously you understood the intention of, like, what those ideas were. And it always sort of ends with like, well, you're wrong because you obviously don't get it, EJ. It happened on the God of War podcast we did, and it was just like, clearly didn't understand what they were intending with these themes. And I was like, no, I understood. I just don't think it was communicated effectively and thus not executed well. And so I think there's a lot about this game that I fucking totally understand why this is I get why it's your favorite game of all time. That's not, you made a face. That was not a disparaging remark. I'm like, there's a lot of cool shit under the surface here. It doesn't move me, but I understand why this is, I understand why this has a 95 on OpenCritic for the people who return to this game.
Why are you for like one brief shining moment? I actually thought you were just going to acknowledge that this is not a game for you. And then you were like, the 95, I see why it's a 95 on OpenCritic. And I went, oh my God, like what? Seriously? For all the people who returned to it. And I'm like, God damn, all of the stuff you're talking about is a personal preference matter. And this is what I mean when I say some of those things. It's like, it's not a matter of like, oh, I don't think you get it. It's a matter of, I think you get it, you didn't like it, and you think that means it's bad.
I wish Brennan was here with us right now, because, not that it needs to become like a us versus you kind of thing, because it's just opinions. But in my thesis about like, maybe not a great game for people who have never played it to come to it in the current year. And I think Brennan's a great example of that. And this is a person who like has way more overlap with the both of you as far as their tastes in games than with me. And so that's where I was like, okay, am I just crazy and don't like the thing? Like, I don't get fucking Dark Souls, Nick. I don't get Elden Ring. I don't understand how it became such a phenomena. Like, I don't understand it. But like, it clearly is a phenomena, and like, you fucking love it. Brennan fucking loves it.
And so is this game.
It is not a phenomenon. Metroid does not sell.
Really, it's a 95 on OpenCritic. It's a 95 on OpenCritic. You're going to tell me it's not a phenomenon. Like, I don't get it. Like,
Elden Ring, which came out in 2022, has sold 20 million copies to date. That's the same number of games Metroid has sold in the past 37 years across 17 different titles. You tell me which one is a phenomenon, Chris.
Why is it? And this is where I'm like, this is a you just don't like it thing. I know you don't like Dark Souls, but you like a lot of the systems in Dark Souls and the thing it does. Some of the things it does well, you just don't like the overall package. Like, we've talked about that when we talked about games like God of War that are clearly aping Dark Souls combat, but have admittedly made it like a lot easier and more approachable, which I appreciate because I'm fucking bad at video games. But like for Metroid specifically and especially, like, this just is so antithetical to what makes sense to you, to what you like, and I get that. But like, at a certain point, after screaming into the ocean all this time, like, is there no recognition of just this is just a me thing? And not that your opinions are invalid. They're perfectly valid. And I would never ask you to revise them, but just to go, that's a me thing. This is an almost everyone else thing.
No, like I said, my intention when like playing this game and talking about it was, what's its value in the current landscape, right? Because this will then segue into a conversation about like what an actual modern Metroid experience would look like. Because this is not a modern Metroid experience, despite it looking great.
You're missing 2 installments, so like, of course, like, it's not going to look like that. Prime 3 looked way different than 1. Some ways good, some ways bad.
I'm just saying, from a modern gamer's perspective who has none of the Metro. Well, I don't say baggage. It's not baggage, but the whole
History.
The history.
Same words, different thing, or different words, same thing.
Baggage has a connotation that I don't intend here. Like the history. Like you guys love this game. It's like me with Wind Waker. Like you guys keep calling Wind Waker mid, and instead of getting triggered and fucking screaming about it, I'm like, fuck. Like maybe, but I don't really like Zelda. I love that game.
Yeah, it's just a weird outlier. I mean, I wanted to make that sort of comparison because I think there are a lot of similarities, not even just the Triforce quest to the artifacts. Like that is a endemic sort of, I think that's more of a reflection of 2002 than it is a reflection of these two games in particular. But I mean, just the way they approach boss fights. Boss fights are very interesting in this Metroid game in particular because they are a combat puzzle. And they are overwrought. They are too long. All the enemies have too much health. The combat always takes way too long. I think that is one of my major sort of criticisms revisiting this game is it was never brief enough to feel satisfying. And like I think of Flagra, like having 4 phases where you have to shoot mirrors, like it would have been cool if it was 3 and the arena was much smaller. Like that would have been like a satisfying boss fight, but it was 4 and the arena's huge and it just takes a long time. But like Parasite Queen, awesome. That's a great like tutorial boss. You fight too many war wasps like for like 3 of your bosses until you get to an actual boss. Thardus takes forever. The Omega Pirate takes forever. The final 2 bosses take for fucking ever. Ridley flying away for 30 seconds at a time and you're just sitting there waiting for no goddamn reason. Like the bosses are not great in this game. There are some fun bosses there, great set pieces, but the fun of them isn't from the boss fights. And I think a lot of that is the same in Zelda. Every Zelda game, like before Breath of the Wild, which they sort of forgo having bosses altogether. So, I mean, you win some, you lose some.
Can I clarify something? I feel like I there's some bad air with Chris. I just want to clarify what I was getting at before we move on.
Sure.
My only point, Chris, was that like I do understand, and instead of just being the reactionary like Metroid's bad, like I get it on a level that I understand why you have such a love for this game in particular. My point was just that I obviously have a more objective look at Metroid as a newcomer than you two can have. And my only other, like anecdotally, my only other experience, like talking to someone who was new to this franchise, Brennan, albeit very different tastes in games and better at games than me, definitely, and loves Metroidvanias. That's like his fucking jam. And I don't want to put words in his mouth because he's not here, but like he really didn't like it for a lot of reasons that are his reasons to share if he comes back on the podcast soon. So to me, I'm like, yeah, what does this game have? Not this franchise, not this genre. What does this game have in the current year? For me, nothing. For most people, probably not as much as they want coming into it for the first time after what they've heard. But I think there's a fucking ton of potential with this world, the atmospheres it's able to create with the modern trappings and modern game design. I'm like, there's a lot they could do. I mean, they clearly did 2D. I mean, Dread was fucking awesome.
EJ, without asking for you to do more homework,
Okay.
like you're asking what is the future of Metroid after playing Metroid Prime 1. And there was a Prime 2 and Prime 3, and they did iterate and they did change things. And I don't think you would like those any more than you disliked Prime 1, you know? Like I think that would be pulling teeth. So I would not ask you to play those games, but maybe we could have a brief conversation about what those games did differently, because I think it is a sort of, I don't know if that trajectory is going to continue into Prime 4 because it's been so long and there is such a fond regard to Prime 1 that I think that they're going to take a lot more inspiration from Prime 1 and Dread than they would from Prime 2 and Prime 3, unfortunately, because there are some things that I definitely prefer in Prime 2 and 3. But I don't know if that's like a conversation we want to have right now or what.
I think in the interest of not keeping EJ here for 3 hours as requested, we don't necessarily have to have like that full conversation. And I think that talking about what do we want from a modern Metroid Prime, and I do want to specify that is what we've been talking about this whole time, not a modern Metroid, because we have that. It's Dread. It's great. Give me like 8 more of those and I can just die. It's fine.
Right.
But a modern Metroid Prime game, because a lot of the things that are on my list come from 2 and 3. And there are some things also from 2 and 3 that I'm like, I never want to see this again. I hope they die in a fire. And I think that'd be all worth talking about. EJ, you teased it a little bit, but what would you want to see in a Metroid Prime 4?
I want more meaningful combat. I want to go into a room full of enemies I have no chance of beating, so that when I come back to that fucking room after a couple of power-ups, because at no point during this game did I feel like the combat's difficult. The combat was the same from beginning to end, and I just did the job over and over and over as I backtracked. I want a real difficulty scale as I go through this world and feel like as I'm powering up and getting these sick-ass fucking weapons. Because, dude, Samus is bad fucking ass, dude. Samus is tight as fuck. And I want to feel tight as fuck. I want to feel powerful by the end of this journey, not just like, oh, this is like 10% faster, like depending on what kind of enemy you're fighting. Like, that is not enough for me. So that is important. You know, if they're going to do the platforming, like, they got to really lean into it. Not just like, and I don't know if the other Prime games like got better as far as the traversal goes. You know, it's like you shoot a fucking platform out of the ice cavern, or like, you know, you open some spinny platforms that come out of like a spiral staircase or whatever. And you're like, okay, like how many times this could just be a skill issue, Chris. I don't know, but how many times I get to the top of one of those things and like
auto turrets just shoot you down.
Well, that's yes, those are awful.
No.
Yes, those suck, but I just mean like, oh, like I didn't hit my jump button close enough to the edge. So like the window where your fucking jump will activate is very weird. So like I'm trying to jump and I'm like, oh, I just missed it. I'm all the way on the floor now.
Yeah, it's a
like,
learning thing. I'm not going to call it a skill issue. It's just a time and acquisition thing. But it's when it locks in, and in the meantime, you're like, that's not quite it. But yeah, anyway.
Or like a lot of 2D Metroidvanias are just going away with combat completely, because like this is not important to what this game is about, which is exploring and unlocking new areas and like whatever. And that's what some people want. The combat feels completely superfluous. Like I don't need to be doing this, other than like that's kind of the conceit. So I want that to feel more earned and more intentional. That as far as like being faithful to the Prime 1 experience, that's the only thing I can really think of. You know, I haven't played the other two, like you said, Nick, so I don't know what they've done or haven't done, but sectioning everything off into rooms, like I want a little bit, I want a bigger space, I want a more open space. You know, I don't love the enemy respawning thing. It just feels like it gets in the way of like what the game wants me to do, which is like explore the world. And it at points just feels kind of like filler.
Yeah, as far as like enemy respawns, there are points in Prime where it does feel earned a little bit, in which as you are progressing the story and you're reading these space pirate logs, as they come to realize that they are being hunted by you, they start, you know, patrolling areas more frequently, and you'll find space pirates where they weren't before. You'll find their drones where they weren't before. So a little bit of that is justified diegetically, but
That's
it is
totally
not.
cool.
I do agree that them just respawning after you leave 2 rooms and you go 2 rooms back and then they're there again, I think is mostly a limitation of the hardware and more just a padding mechanism, honestly, for a game put out in 2002 that they were worried was going to be too short. Like, obviously, like that was the worry of many games, because they didn't want this game to be rented once and then not bought.
Right.
You know?
And padding also in terms of, because the way they were able to run this game so well, even back in the days of the GameCube, is that it's loading rooms in front of you while you're progressing through those rooms. So each room, and you could even, if you, in the GameCube version, I did not encounter this in this version, but if you got through some of those like real tunnely hallways fast enough, like with the boost ball,
balling through,
you'd shoot the door and it would not open for a second. Like the blue screen would drop and the room wasn't finished loading. And then when it was finished loading, it would slap the door open. That's why it's running at 60 frames. So you have a lot of those tunnels in the Chozo Ruins where all the scarab beetles are dropping down. It is to make you wait an extra 15 seconds to load the next like sick ass puzzle room that you're going into. But I get that. I that is padding. I recognize that entirely. It's clever padding, but it's still padding.
And how important are these things? Like I understand why Metroid Prime is designed the way it is.
I mean, do you want 60 frames in a Metroid Prime 4? Because I don't know if we're getting 60 frames if they don't be really intentional with how they load these areas. And it also is a staple of the series. Not that it has to stay that way, we can get some bigger
Right.
rooms. But I think in Prime 2 and certainly in Prime 3, we get some big fucking rooms. So there is a lot more variety, not only in terms of like environment, but in terms of like room design, like in the fucking Sanctuary Fortress in Prime 2. Jesus Christ, there are some massive rooms with some amazing puzzles.
Let me pitch something, and then
Pitch it.
I want you guys to talk about like what you want. Because I'm not qualified to talk about what a Prime 4 should look like. I'm not qualified. These games aren't for me.
Your opinions are valid though, and I do
No,
like
yeah, no,
hearing
this
from
is
you.
good.
Like, I love this. Yeah.
All I could think of when I'm exploring this world and taking in just the atmosphere. I keep saying the vibes, but the Metroid vibes are strong. You know, not just the music, but you know, the world design, the enemy design, like Samus herself. And I know you guys haven't played this game, and I also want to give the caveat ahead of this pitch that like I don't think the answer to making Metroid cool for someone like me is just like turn it into Doom. And I texted you that earlier, Chris. Metroid is not a shooter. Do I think it would be better if it were? Yes. But it should not just be like, all right, we're going to go kill space pirates for 14 hours and that's it. Like, that's not what Metroid is about. But I couldn't help but think if Titanfall 2 was in the Metroid universe and you're playing as Samus instead of a dude in a sick mech, and there are a lot of things that are like mech specific. Obviously, it's not a one-to-one. But I was like, man, the things that game did really well, if Metroid Prime were to be reimagined as a serious action platforming shooter and like really interesting new platforming mechanics that are so closely tied to your weapon upgrades and your suit upgrades. I mean, it's a very similar conceit, playing the game and upgrading your giant mech. But that game excelled with the shooting. And there was plenty of platforming. There was a little bit of puzzle solving. There was a very explicit narrative with awesome characters. And it's not for everybody. It's a little cheeky, like, whatever. This isn't a Titanfall podcast. If Metroid were to be reimagined while still being faithful to sort of what makes Metroid cool in my eyes, that is the direction I would want it to go. And I thought about this because there's no comparison for this game. I'm like Half-Life, kind of, but not really, because Half-Life is A, more competent shooter, and B, has a more explicit narrative. So like it's hard to find a comp for it, but that felt to me like kind of on the nose if this game were being made today. So anyway, we're gonna do a Titanfall 2 playthrough, and you guys are gonna disagree with me so hard and be mad that I even pitched that idea. But anyway,
I do agree that the thing that a Prime game, a Prime 4 specifically, the thing that I would want the most from it is traversal improvements. Dread showed that it is fun to move around as Samus when she has these really cool maneuverability options. And Prime 2 added the space jump, or not the space jump, but the
screw attack.
Screw attack, you know, but they only let you do 3 jumps because of limitation of the hardware, and it's really weird because they have to pull out into 3D space to let you do that. And then Prime 3 had the wall jump sort of stuff, but that's like very limited because you have to just set it up and then just sort of continue it because you don't control yourself in a 3D environment in third person. So I don't think you can really rely on the Metroid staples from the 2D series. And I don't think you should, because those maneuverability mechanics are designed from a 2D perspective and they don't translate well, so don't try to. Having like a wall run, I think Samus can wall run. Like why shouldn't she? Like, she's a badass, like you said, EJ, so give her a wall run.
Yeah,
I think that would fit perfectly well.
Boots.
Give her a slide. She slides in Dread, like, you know, give her some cool shoes, and then she can run on a wall, and then she can slide under a thing and then transition into a roll like she does in Dread. I think that works really well in that game, so why not borrow it and use it, because it's been done in first person shooters. And yeah, I do agree that the combat is never hard in Metroid Prime. It is just tedious, and then your reward is making it less tedious. And that worked for that game, because I know you guys say it's not a shooter. It is a shooter. The main thing you do is shoot things. It's a shooter and a reader. It's like a walking simulator shooter. So that's my take on it. Whatever.
sure.
But if they made it more of a shooter in the future, I wouldn't be opposed to that. I do not want a story told to me in cutscenes. I think that is not what Metroid would benefit from, and I think Nintendo is not capable of doing that. Not right now.
I agree.
So Yeah, that's my take at least on it. And then as far as other things is like the world, I would want it to be a interesting place to be located in and explore. And whether that's room by room or something more open, I don't think I want a more open sort of Metroid game, but it's also hard because there aren't really any other third person or first person games that are Metroid like in their like environment design. So what are my options of comparing it to besides Dark Souls, which wraps around in on itself and has backtracking, which is similar to a Metroidvania, or something like Dead Space, which is a game that I've only played a little bit of, but just the sort of vibe of it is very survival horror. So if they do a Metroid game that is not focused on maneuverability and feeling like a badass, then the other option I would really love is a more horrific take, because Metroid does have like horror tinges to it, being inspired heavily by Alien. So if they put you in a scenario in which, I mean, they've done this before. I mean, Metroid Dread is all about that. Metroid Fusion is all about that, where you are not powerful yet and you are being hunted and like you're scared. I think they could do that and do that really well. But I don't know if that's what they want to do. I think they want to give you that power fantasy. I think that's like a more triumphant return. And then they could play with it in like a Metroid Prime 5 and have that be you're brought down to Earth moment or whatever, just being brought down low so that you're afraid of something. But I don't think that's a Prime 4 sort of pitch, I guess.
Chris, what do you want in Prime 4?
A lot of it's already been mentioned. I want more options for traversal was going to be the first thing that I said. Just because of in a post Metroid Dread world where we see how that game works when they do make the combat meaningful, and like EJ, I know you like, I played Dread, you played a little bit of Dread, like you kind of played Dread. When you get to the later parts of Dread, it is a fucking action game. Like
all the bosses are just so good.
The bosses are fucking amazing. The final boss of Metroid Dread is the best final boss and maybe the best boss overall in the entire Metroid series, like period, full stop. It is incredible and it is fucking hard, and it makes you use all of the different traversal and combat mechanics that you have learned at a high level or you will die. It is really difficult. If you didn't hate backtracking, I would say pick it back up and play it, because I think you would be pleasantly surprised with the way that game feels compared to 2D Metroid historically. So in a world after that, I think we need different ways of moving through the environment. I think that I agree to a point with regards to combat. I don't want it to become about combat. Which is maybe what you're saying, EJ, when you're like, I don't want it to be Doom, where the point is just to like absolutely wreck face and like blast things apart, which is fun. But it's just like so not the point of these games. I'm of two minds. I think that either with Prime 4, they do need to give us, like Nick said, a really interesting new environment. I guess I'm of three minds. Give us like one really interesting planet with some really diverse biomes / like civilizations that you interact with potentially. Or give me what they did in Metroid Prime 3, but exploded to a much bigger scale where you're going to many planets. In Prime 3, you travel to 3 distinct worlds during the course of the game, and then there's a 4th world that's an endgame world. And that was awesome.
The spaceship.
Yeah, and the ship. That was awesome. That was so cool and made so much more sense to me than the geography of this absolutely batshit planet in Talon 4, where you're like, this planet doesn't exist,
where the lava pace is connected to the ice place.
Well, yeah, through elevators that only go up and down, and so I'm like, I don't understand. At least in Prime 2 they like move laterally, and I'm like, thank fucking god, this makes so much more sense. Anyway, so either give me one really interesting world, give me a bunch of planets that I can travel to, that there are a lot of things I can do at each upgrade checkpoint, so that there's a little more branching out of just like straight backtracking, which I still wouldn't mind, or take me to Zebes and realize it in 3 dimensions. I think that could be,
that'd be really cool.
That could be like Super Metroid Prime, like that would be fucking tight. Like literally just do Super Metroid as a first-person shooter. Because the combat in Super Metroid, like you cannot just like take hits. Like you have to be really mindful of the way you interact with enemies in that game. Honest to God, too, I think that Dread did it better, but there was a lot of interesting stuff that the combat and Other M did that I think would be worth revisiting. Like specific like timed dodges in order to like get around to a weak side of an enemy. Like that would be fucking sick if there's like a timing window of, oh, if I strafe this enemy that I'm locked onto right when they initiate their attack animation, I flip out to like a little third person thing where I see me like whip around and like get into a weak point, and then we jump back to the visor.
Or even like
just
the melee counter from Dread.
Right. And I'm just like pap, 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 pap. Like, you know, that would be really cool. I don't want switchable beams ever again. In Metroid Prime 2, EJ, there are 4 beams that are basically like reskins of the way that the arm cannon looks, but they're all like very different weapons. It's just like, oh, that was the ice beam, now it's the dark beam. Oh, that was the wave beam, now it's the light beam. Oh, that was a plasma beam, now it's the annihilator beam. Like, I get it. It makes sense the shapes look that way, but whatever. But in Metroid Prime 3, they went back to beam stacking. So all of your upgrades combine together. So when you get the wave beam, your power beam now does electrical damage. When you get the plasma beam, your beam now also melts things and can power things up, et cetera, which I think just makes so much more goddamn sense than like toggling. Even though there is something to be said about like the rock, paper, scissors of like which beam do I need to use on what enemy type. But again, how meaningful can you make that in a way that in Prime 1, I will even acknowledge like, oh, it's another fucking hallway with pulse bombus, and I have to roll into the fucking morph ball and go under them, or I have to sit here and like pop them with the wave beam when my visor gets all distorted. I'm sick of waiting for this. I get that. I would like to see... I'm so hesitant to say the word like explicit narrative because they did it in Metroid Prime 3, and I thought it was one of the most piece of shit things I've ever seen. Just in every conceivable way. The voice acting was fucking god awful. None of it mattered.
You want to see a good narrative.
No, I get that. I'm just saying it's fucking Nintendo. And I would rather if they're going to give me something that's closer to Prime 3's narrative or something that's closer to Prime 1's narrative, give me Prime 1's narrative. Even Metroid Prime 2, there's a little more of an explicit narrative, and you can dive deep into the Luminoth lore and reading Galactic Federation trooper logs. At the beginning of Prime 2, Samus gets a transmission from a group of Federation folks that have landed on this planet, and you go down there and you like watch their videos and like read their logs, and you just see them getting like overrun and murdered by the Ing. And that was fucking tight. And getting to read like they can feel the possession taking hold and they're starting to lose their minds and stuff like that. That strikes a pretty good balance, but I still don't know if I want words. I don't know if I want words or if I want you to tell me that story cinematically and visually, even though it's explicit. It's that cutscene thing. Like, I don't want Metroid cutscenes either. And in Prime 2, every time one of the Luminoth talked to me, I was just like, yeah, okay, A button, A button, A button, A button. How could you do this without just info dumping? And they did it in Dread 2. I was like, big fat fucking plot dump, and now we're moving on. And Adam was talking to you periodically, which was great, but the meaningful ones were like big fat dumps.
A lot of that is just, can they do it well? Because if we think about what our number one game of all time is, unanimously, in Hollow Knight, there's a lot of characters in that game. They all have very distinct personalities. They all have dialogue. They all talk to you. You don't talk to them at all. I mean, it's a silent character. Samus can have, dialogue once or twice, and that can still be impactful like it was in Dread. But I think there can be a story that's like told to you, but is also indistinct and sort of vague and more just about a location and like a tone setting, and still be impactful and interesting. It's just a matter of whether or not they can do that. And if that fits the aesthetic of you being this bounty hunter, this hired gun, or just this, savior of a planet, whatever the role of Samus is in this new game, are you going to be talking to aliens and they are just like going about their day doing their thing? Like, is that weird to think of you being in a habited place, or is it just going to be endemic life forms and then occasionally having a murder sprinting space pirate lunging at you and suddenly the combat is necessary? Like, I don't know what that balance looks like. I bet being a game developer is really hard, but being a game player is a lot easier and still also pretty hard sometimes.
Oh, dude, for sure. And like, is there a hub area where you interact with people? Like, I would be super duper down for like.
Does Samus have a son who tells her the hints to the puzzles?
I think we need to use the hex arrows to.
The hex
Get on
beam.
fire,
Let's
Kratos!
go.
It'll pass.
Samus is Scottish now. I thought she was Irish. Seamus.
It's Seamus. It's always been Seamus.
Aran. Oh my god. Chris, I'll ask you first because I feel like you're gonna have the most knee-jerk reaction to what I'm about to say. But let me flesh it out, okay?
Christ.
Let me flesh it out. I don't know what the solution is to my problems with the map in this game. I was really annoyed. I think the solution is some combination of custom like way markers and a compass system. I don't want to be told where to go because the point of the game is to explore it yourself. But like when we were texting earlier and I was complaining about the hints for the fucking artifacts, and you're like, the name of the rooms is fucking in the hints, and I'm like, it's annoying that I'm pulling up this map, I'm going all these fucking hexagons, finding the right area, going to looking for the room, scanning this whole fucking obnoxious map that I just hate moving around. I know that Jedi did it like worse than Metroid, but I hated it in that fucking game and I hated it here. But I was just like, why can't I just like scan the hint now that I've gotten to this point and it can just, it's not a puzzle I'm solving. It's not a fucking secret. It's right there. Why can't you just fucking show me where to go now that I've explored this world multiple fucking times? Just let me just Zelda and ping something. And obviously, like the room system, like it would have to be a compass, not like a ping you see in the overworld. But you get my meaning. Like I've explored this world, I've seen it all. Let me just make my life a little easier, please.
You're saying you want to set waypoints.
Yeah, but you couldn't do waypoints in Prime specifically because it's so contained.
You could in a way, like you could have it so that it highlighted doors that were like the path that you should be taking.
You're in an Iron Man suit. Give me a little compass in the HUD, and yeah, you can highlight a door.
There is an NESW compass, I think.
Maybe in 2. 2 also had room highlighting which was awesome. I loved that. Where like late game, it would do the thing that other 2D Metroid games do, where if there's something that's like a secret undiscovered in a room, there's like a little icon on it, and when it's done, when you have the thing, that icon changes, so you can actually keep track of like, oh, I need to go back to this room later.
That's EJ proof.
I have to nerd check you there. That's Sid Prime 3. I wish it was in
Is that
Prime
3?
2. Yeah,
fuck.
that you can get. There's a specific room in one of the planets that you get to it, and it sends out like a satellite.
It's like a beacon.
Yeah, it sends out a satellite that literally scans for stuff and puts all the dots on. And I was like, thank fucking God. So I want that in Metroid Prime 4. I want the scan visor also from Prime 2 and 3. I cannot for the life of me think of why they kept the wretched orange-red block system, and then it just like gets slightly darker once you scan it. In Prime 2 and 3, the whole item is lit. In blue, if it's non-essential lore, in red, or non-essential information, red if it's essential, and green if it has been scanned previously. So you can pop the scan visor and it colors the whole world in, oh, I haven't scanned that yet. Major improvement.
I could see Metroid quickly becoming like a checklist game, the kind of checklist game that I like, where I'm going through and I'm completing the fucking, it's like, all right, it's going to show me what I need to scan. What can I learn from this thing? It's going to point me in other directions, and I'm just checking all the boxes in my fucking, compendium.
Yeah, there's just enough weird little hurdles before you actually get to that point. Like even in the pause menu, going to your log entries, it's like it's just obfuscated enough that it feels unimportant. So if it was more like in your face, if it was a dedicated tab, like here is all the information that you've gathered and what it relates to, point things out on the map, like you said, EJ, like this is where you found this thing, this is where you scanned it, and it relates to this area, and then you can put clues together that way. I think, yeah, making it more explicit in the way things are related to each other, not because you as a player are stupid or incapable of making those connections yourself, but because it's just a quality of life thing. It's just to actually point you in a direction as opposed to pointing in a direction. It's like, I have to find that out myself again. have to like reread that and recontextualize it on my own. Like that's too much work for a player, and we're getting too old for that shit.
I can see a world where in lieu of like waypoints, because that works a lot better in a 2D game, to just like slap an icon down on the map and then like follow it. Give you like 3 or 4 different colors that you can highlight 4 or 5 different rooms in, where you're like, oh, I'm marking yellow rooms for, I'm pretty sure I need the space jump to get here. I'm marking red rooms for, there's a missile expansion. Green rooms is this, so that even in a 3D map, which ideally you should be able to scroll over faster. I would love to see a faster scrolling map.
And swap the sticks, for Christ's sake. Oh my God.
Right. That way you could go, okay, where's that red room? I know that there's something in there that I wanted to go to. Great. I can chart my little way, because that's something I like about the map that I don't want to lose, EJ, is having to find your path. And go, okay, this is the way I want to go.
Yeah, all I want is a direction. Like if I just have a floating arrow in one corner of my screen that like points up and to the left, that's all I really want. Like I just know I have to go up and I have to go left. That's all I want.
No, I'm not going to dismiss that out of hand. EJ, that's a great point. And that's the map should be easier to navigate, even while also making you do this sort of like mental tracking. And how can we make that a little bit easier for folks? I think that's eminently achievable. And Dread's map was the best map ever. Everything is so easy. You can literally highlight each different kind of door and gray out everything else on the map. Like maybe we can find something similar in a 3D frame of like selecting and deselecting things. So you're like, where is that fucking ice beam door that I can't remember where it is? Let me just highlight all the ice beam doors. There, it's that. That's the room I need to go to.
You know what's so funny, as I'm just thinking, like, I'm hearing what you're saying and like thinking about what I like in a game. I'm very much a Skyrim guy. I want to like vaguely know what needs to happen next, place a marker and know that I'm always going in the right direction, and then just see what I experience along the way. You know what I mean? Whether I'm riding or I'm running, I know that's my direction, and I'm going to end up where I need to go eventually if I keep doing this. And let's just see where the game takes me. Whereas Metroid and games like this are very much, it's the opposite of that. It's like the world is every step of the way, you need to be cognizant of what's happening, and there's like one specific thing you're trying to achieve in this area until you unlock the thing to achieve the next thing. It's exhausting for me. It's just a lot to always be keeping track of. And I'm like, I just want to kind of go and see what happens with the world and let it develop. And this is obviously, Metroid is not a fucking action adventure RPG. So like, I'm just describing the differences and like the things I like more or less.
It makes sense, man. It makes sense.
Making the connection between like, why did this game exhaust me? Why is it so tedious? Versus like, just give me the direction and I'll just fucking figure it out on the way.
One man's tedious is another man's lore boner. You know, like it's just.
I think something that I would really like in a Metroid Prime 4 is something that is very exemplary in Hollow Knight, where it is branching. It is not linear. Metroid Prime, without doing like speedrun style like level skips or something like that, is a very linear game. I mean, you go from point A to point B to point C throughout the game, and yeah, you do backtrack, but it is deliberate backtracking where you're like, oh, I have to go back and get this thing so that I can accomplish my next task. Like you were talking about, EJ, like I see that there are grapple points, and that means I will be coming back here with the grapple beam to get to the next place so I can get the plasma beam so I can, A to B to C. But if it was a more realized world where it was not, you're in the lava zone and you have 3 elevators that take you to different areas that take you to different zones. It was a more realized map where it was you can walk from anywhere to anywhere else without going into an elevator. I think that was the biggest downfall of the Prime trilogy and also of Dread and Fusion, where everything's just like discreetly tucked away behind elevators. And like you're in this level, you're in a big level. And I think that I would love if it was more exploratory and I'm more invested in the world and like my relation to it. And I think having a branching sort of tree of choices is understandably overwhelming for someone like you, EJ. Like that is EJ like poison. That is how you turn EJ off of a game completely, is by giving you too many choices and not telling you which one to take, which one's the optimal choice, what's the optimal path.
Giving me choices that like all matter equally. Skyrim has a million choices and things I'll never experience, but they only matter if they matter to me and my playstyle. In Metroid, it's like everything kind of matters and everyone's got the same playstyle because that's how the game is designed.
Well, I'm talking about like Hollow Knight, where you could go to an area before someone else does because you just chose to go there first. It's almost open world in that regard, but it's still guided and linear in other ways. Like Chris, I don't remember which order you did it in, but like going to Deep Nest, like you can go there without a lantern and like it sucks, but like if you buy that thing and you have the Crystal Dash before you go to the Deep Nest, if you wanted to go to the Crystal Peaks before doing that area, and that completely recontextualizes the way you tackle that specific zone. And that's, I think, easier to do in a two-dimensional game because of just there's so many things you can do in a 2D game, and then there are even more things you can do in a 3D game because there's an extra dimension, it turns out. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of like what I would want, and I do think that a non-linear Metroid game would be awesome and a return to form a little bit. I think Super Metroid is blown out of proportion in the way people talk about it as if it is a completely non-linear game. Like there is a implied linear path to that game. Like they want you to beat the bosses in a certain order. It's laid out in a specific way, but you can break it and it allows you to do that, and it is a valid way to play. But I think it would be more interesting if it was an encouraged way to play, because a lot of like the new era of Metroidvanias, the games that are taking huge cues from Super Metroid and Castlevania Symphony of the Night, a lot of them do have a non-linear sort of approach to them that lets you tackle things in different orders. And then that is really cool because if you have this power up in this area, that changes the way you interact with that area. And that is something that I really like about Metroid games, is having these different abilities and how that changes the way you play the game. Like I'm just thinking about how cool it would be to not have a wall run in this area. And then EJ, you did have the wall run because you got the wall run first because you love wall running, and how that changes our experience and the way we talk about it and the way we enjoy these games. And it's just, I would love that.
I don't know if I'd necessarily call Hollow Knight non-linear as much as that it has branches. But I that's kind of what I was referred to as talking about. Like if you're going to give us like an explosion of the idea of Prime 3 where we have 3 different planets, you give us like 5 or 6 like distinct worlds that if I got a specific item, I could go to a bunch of different places in whatever order I wanted and explore a bunch of shit, even though there is like one path that will take me to the thing that's going to ungate the rest of stuff, so that I could go out and I wouldn't have to just backtrack through the Chozo ruins again to get the ice beam, and then be able to backtrack like really specifically through a couple parts of Phaedrana because I have the ice beam now. And you can't like really there is like one path pretty much that you have to take for like 90% of Metroid Prime. But it would be very interesting to be able to go do a lot of stuff every time that we get another key piece.
Right, which is what non-linear means. Like it means that you don't have to go to the next thing. You go to whatever you want next.
Well, to me, that means that I have options, but non-linear to me is that it can literally be completed in any order, but I don't think that's an accurate description of what I just said. Because you would still eventually have to go, you still have to go to this point if you want the story to continue, which in effect is still linear, even though I could go do like side quests and stuff. I don't know. It's a
I guess agree to disagree, because I don't know. That sounds exactly what nonlinear storytelling is in a video game. Not even just storytelling, but just like experiential. Like if I could play Pokemon and take the gym leaders on in any order, but I still have to beat the Elite Four last, that's not linear anymore. That's nonlinear. Just because I have the A and Z are the same, that doesn't mean that it is the same line.
In this theoretical Metroid game, like you couldn't go get the grapple beam before the space jump boots, though. So like it's not really.
No, I'm saying in my theoretical version, you can, and that just changes the way you tackle things. Like once you have all the keys, you can get to the final thing, but you can get those keys in any order you so choose.
That would be interesting.
I don't think I want that. And that's totally fine. I think that would be like a game that would appeal to many people and would not necessarily appeal to me.
I feel like there are games that, well, there are obviously games that do that, but there are Metroid-inspired games that do that.
Yeah, Hollow Knight does that.
Is it sectioned?
Not entirely. I mean, it starts out narrow, and then there's a middle section where it gets very wide, in that there are many different paths that you can take, and then it squeezes back in again. And there's optional things, like there are things that you do not need to get that many people will because it feels like it is necessary, but it is not. And that's sort of a little bit the kind of sequence breaking that a lot of Metroid style games end up having, just by basis of having so many different maneuverability upgrades where you can like sort of cheese your way into locations you're maybe not necessarily supposed to be. But yeah, I mean, that is what Hollow Knight does. There's not like a like canon golden path through that game. Like every time you beat a boss, not every time, but like so many times when you beat a boss and you get a new thing, like 3 different distinct locations open up to you.
Listen, do I want to go to Celadon or Saffron next?
I mean, that's up to you, man. Do you have fire Pokemon or you got electric Pokemon? Whatever.
Oh man, the new Pokemon game's actually non-linear, right? You can beat gyms in any order.
Well, you can, but they scale. They don't scale. So it's there's like an implied order.
Yeah.
And like I don't want, so when people talk about level scaling in like Skyrim, there's level scaling because the enemies literally scale to your level. What I would want is like badge scaling in an open world Pokemon game where after you beat the first you get your first badge, every option for your second badge is as difficult as every other option.
Yeah, and it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, so I mean, I say that's all you would need, but all you would need is 8 distinct like team comps for each gym leader based on however many badges you have.
Yep.
I think that would work well.
Yeah, at what point do they pop from like 2 to 3 Pokemon and 3 to 4, etc. And then when you get to like badge 7, 8, like you're fighting like full teams of 6.
The gym leaders should actually do what they are canonically implied to be doing.
Checking your progress at a certain point in time based on your level of experience. Yes. Did you watch the animated shorts they released? I can't even remember what it's called, Pokemon Adventures, but it basically was doing the game in an animated short form. I weep for that not being a fully realized series because it is so fucking good. And they literally do that.
Cool.
Like when he's battling Brock and Brock's like, you're just starting on your journey, and so I'm gonna select my team accordingly. And you see that he's got like 6 or 7 Pokeballs and like a Great Ball, and he really specifically picks up the one. And then when he's fighting like Giovanni's like, fuck this kid and the horse he rode in on, and pulls out like 3 Ultra Balls. I'm like, that is so smart. Why are we not doing this? Like, anyway, we're way off the shark here, but.
Huge tangent, sorry.
Hey, I know that we went 2.5 hours, but like, come on. I know we said it at the top. Let's not do that. But like, I still feel like there's still things to talk about in this game that we didn't talk about, but we're not going to. At this point.
I mean, I don't know that we
I'm gonna
need to.
beat it.
You are, and I'm fucking proud of you because again, this is so not your steez, and you have really hung in there, and I appreciate it, and I want to hear what you have to say about it. Top 100. I want to hear what you have to say about it when all's said and done. But I think we got like the big strokes on the table, and I think we put our hearts on our sleeves and exchanged good ideas and had only very minimal I don't know,
acrimony.
Yeah, eruptions. I don't know.
Console Crusade, baby. That's how we do it.
It's not the Console Parlay podcast. It's the Console Crusade podcast.
We're all on our own individual crusades. It's implied that we're on it together, but we are actually fighting each other, and that's what it is. Welcome.
The listeners should know by now.
It's been 6 years, god damn it.
Yes.
I'm glad I played this game because it means so much to you guys, and it is so high on our list. I know the trilogy is on the list, and that is on the list of things to revisit next year when we revisit that whole idea. But if we launch a website, we're going to have a page, Console Crusade's Top 100, and we're going to have little blurbs for all the games on the list, so we're going to have to revisit it at some point. I'm glad to have experienced it so that I could, like I said earlier, I understand now. It's not just that, like, I'm like, oh, that's bad. It's like, oh, I get it. And that's good. I don't like it, but that's me.
And I love that.
EJ, you're growing as a man.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
Don't accuse me of such things.
And
sorry.
we'll do a Wind Waker HD retrospective sometime later this year, I'm sure. And
We'll see.
we'll do a
Let's do some
Titanfall
new
2
games.
pod.
Yeah. It's just funny how that's become like a bit for the Console Crusade.
I want to play it. I genuinely
It's
want
just
to play
one
it.
of the few games that you absolutely like evangelize and talk about loving so much. So we latch onto it. Obviously, I mean, we listen to you. It's just that you're not frequently talking about, oh man, I love this game.
That's true. Because I don't like anything, guys. Thanks for reminding me.
EJ,
No.
we know.
All right, buddy.
I started Luigi's Mansion 3 the other day because Nick, that was a contender for the list, but then we didn't have the shared experience. So I figured, maybe I'll play that. It was on sale. I'll pick it up. Maybe we can revisit that if I, I'm into that. So anyway, we'll figure out what our next little retrospective review rant. It's more like a rant. If you're gonna choose an R word, it's not a retrospective or review. It's just a rant about a thing.
Whoa, no R words, no R words on this podcast.
The hard R words.
Ruh-roh.
Console Crusade Rcast.